Good morning and welcome to Ask the Expert. It's an award-winning daily series from 8:30 to 9 to help small businesses. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments of the live feed. And if you need any more advice, join the official Intuit QuickBook SMB community group on Facebook. Accountants and business experts are on hand 24/7. And during this live session today, we're going to be running a poll, so please do engage with it, and I'll reveal the results at the end. So it's really nice to be invited back here again to Ask the Expert. It's a word that makes me feel very vulnerable. My name's Helen McGillivray, and I'm a psychological therapist. The psychological models I work with, the frameworks I use, are all rooted in contextual and behavioural science. It underpins all of my work with individuals and groups. And it's basically a very well-researched, evidence-based tool. There's lots of randomised controlled studies supporting the work that we all do. So I have a company called Compass Therapy, and I work with adults, mainly adults, individuals and groups, and I also work with organisations. And essentially the premise of what I do is about alleviating human suffering. So helping people understand the psychological aspects of their thinking, feeling, behaviours, and helping them come up with more helpful solutions to managing and navigating their way through life. I do a bit of work for Stirling University, and I am the clinical director for a new startup called OK Positive, which is a mental health app. It's a business-to-business app we're giving it to employers to give to their employees, again, to help boost and promote better narratives about mental health in the workplace. So the functions of the app are, there's a mood diary, because we at OK Positive encourage people to become more self-aware. We believe that if you're more self-aware, then you can make better decisions about life choices and be better informed about triggers and things that maybe cause stress or anxiety. We also have an insights page, so you can see over a period of time how your mood has been. You can track it, maybe link it to behaviours. But the biggest bulk of the app is the resources section, which is there's psychological resources there. So we're pulling in lots of content from lots of really other experts like myself to give people psychological tools to manage their well-being. There's also things like yoga, monetary advice about sleep, lots of really great stuff on there. There's an interactive map on the app, so you can see if there's any therapists, counsellors, coaches nearby. And we also work with discount partners to encourage people to, look after themselves, have coffees, go to yoga classes, and that's on the interactive map as well. And there's a news feed for employers to pass out information to their employees. So yeah, if you want any more information about OK Positive, please do look us up. I'll give the details at the end of today's session. So the theme for today is vulnerability and the power of vulnerability. It's so easy in our modern world to feel completely overwhelmed. We do lots of things to avoid feeling uncomfortable emotions. We can get very caught up in negative thoughts, and we can get very stuck in repetitive patterns of behaviour that really don't serve us well. For example, some of the things I do, if I feel uncomfortable, one thing could be that when I was asked to Ask the Expert today, I could have said no, because I just don't like doing these things. So, there's things that we do in our life to prevent uncomfortable feelings. As children, if you think about it, we're programmed from about a very young age to not show emotion, as children we're often told, stop whining or just get on with it and pull yourself together. So these are the messages that we've had imprinted into us from a very young age. But not only that, it's part of our primitive kind of functioning to kind of present ourselves as good and the best so that people like us and want us to be part of their teams. And this kind of translates into the working world as well. So I wanted to talk about this today because I feel at the moment we're coming out of lockdown, the pandemic's continuing, there's all sorts of things going on, and I'm hearing from my work, both with the individual work that I do, that there's lots of behaviours that people are doing to adapt to our virtual world. There's, people are feeling they need to be the best that they can be, and they're struggling. And from employers as well, they want people to talk about how they're feeling. So I guess I'm just curious to hear from you all about your experiences of being vulnerable, particularly in the workplace. So Brené Brown, who is an author in the States, she's done a fantastic TED Talk. She describes vulnerability as uncertainty and emotional exposure. So this can translate in so many different ways. Being vulnerable essentially is the ability to show others that you're not perfect, that you make mistakes, and that perhaps you don't have all the answers. So in my mind, that's simply just being a human being. We're so up against it that we don't want other people to see that maybe we don't know things, but actually I think there's a bit of a charm in showing vulnerability. So maybe when you're thinking about questions or comments, think about some of the times when you've maybe felt vulnerable, and I'd be happy to answer questions around about that. I think it's quite encouraging that leaders perhaps see vulnerability as a way of creating trust and honesty, and that's very important. We humans like to connect, but we can't do that if we're not willing to show our internal experiences, if we're feeling fearful or frightened, or if we're struggling. So perhaps when we are more vulnerable, we can get maybe better, closer connections with people. I thought I'd maybe drop in a bit of a metaphor just to illustrate vulnerability, and it might seem a bit odd, but I heard this from one of my colleagues, Ross McIntosh, who was interviewing someone for his podcast, but they described a hermit crab. So the hermit crab lives in a shell for a while and eventually it outgrows him, I'll call him a him, and it maybe doesn't suit him, it doesn't serve him well. But over in the corner of where they're living, they can see a nice, sparkly, more spacious, accommodating shell. So in order to get to that shell, the hermit crab has to come out of the old shell and into the new. But there's a space of time in the middle there where they're very vulnerable and exposed. But if they don't do that, then the choice would be that they would live in a shell that's outgrown them and it's very uncomfortable. If they're willing to be vulnerable, then, you can get the glitzy, fancy, more spacious, accommodating shell. So just think about the hermit crab when you want to stay stuck in your old ways. When I want to avoid, or when I want to go into my old patterns of behaviour, I need to think about the why I'm wanting to be vulnerable. I thought I'd just mention the little hermit crab. I like that little analogy. So my tips for showing vulnerability: expect to feel uncomfortable. It's not easy. And I really like the saying that discomfort is the price you pay for a better quality of life. So it's not something that's going to make you feel comfortable straight away. And if we focus on building relationships and having closer connections, then vulnerability is a way to do that. So focusing more on the relationship rather than the business that you're attending to. That might seem contradictory when we're told that the business should come first. So ask questions, be curious. If you don't know something, speak up about it. Or if you think someone's struggling, then don't be scared to ask. Often that's all that's needed to help someone open up a little bit more. And always lead by example. If you're not willing to be vulnerable, then how can you expect other people to take that leap? So if you want to show vulnerability, maybe do it in small stages and see what happens. And carve out time, maybe before or after meetings, especially on the virtual world, just to check in, really just to ask how people are. And And if you see people are struggling, reach out. So I'm looking forward to your questions and maybe comments. Feel free to give comments on where you have felt vulnerable. But I thought before we get into the questions, it might be helpful. I've done Ask the Expert a few times before, and I always offer up a mindfulness practice just to give us an opportunity in our day to maybe check in with ourselves. We don't do that very often. So if you're willing, I invite you to close your eyes and to sit comfortably in your chair, and maybe strong, comfortable stance with your eyes closed. And just being aware of your feet on the floor. Maybe being aware of your seat and your feeling of pressure on the chair. Just noticing any points of contact with the chair or whatever you're sitting on. Feeling your feet on the floor. And just observing the pressure points. And maybe just noticing what your mind's doing just now. Mine is worrying, having lots of thoughts. And maybe just observing any sensations in the body. Again, I'm noticing my heart is racing. And perhaps just being aware of your breath. Just using the breath to anchor us into the present moment, into the now. So just noticing the breath as it's moving through your body. Maybe observing the cooler air coming in through your nostrils as you inhale. And then following that breath round your body, just moment to moment. Just using the breath to come to this place of I, here now. And if your mind's wandering, that's absolutely fine. That's what our minds do. Just notice where it's gone. Is it past, present, or future? And just escort your attention back to the breath. Just moving in the body. Noting the cooler air in your nostrils as you inhale. And just notice where the breath is moving in your body. And now expanding your awareness back out to your whole body, sitting on the chair, being aware of the environment round about you. And before we finish this practice, perhaps just think about when someone you care about has been vulnerable with you. And think about how that made you feel. Being aware of the room, being aware of any sounds, connecting again with the world round about us. And when we're ready, let's open our eyes and just have a wriggle and come back into the session. So hopefully that gave you a couple of minutes just to unplug from the world round about you and think about any questions you might want to ask. So I can see now there's some questions coming in, so we'll move on to these now. So Vanessa on Facebook Messenger, I put a lot of time into my self-care routine in lockdown, but I've had less time for it now we're back in the office. Any advice on how to find or make time when your workday is all over the place? Well, Vanessa, I think that's a very valid question, and I'm sure one that a lot of people can resonate with. I think if you're feeling this, then well done for noticing. And I guess it's hard when we've had this experience that we've never had before, where we could maybe prioritize our self-care. But as well, it's allowed us the opportunity to see how important it is. So what I would maybe suggest is, I don't know how you feel about this, but maybe having a discussion in the workplace, or maybe speaking with your line manager, or I don't know what your setup is, but really thinking about how you can structure your day to incorporate some self-care into it. I would say maybe having some time away from your desk, or using the morning or evening commute to try and fit some self-care in might be an option. Making sure you're having lunches. Something I quite often say to my patients is maybe between calls or between meetings, just pausing for a moment and doing a short mindfulness practice. I know on the app, on our OK Positive app, there's quite a lot of resources on there that people can use when you're sitting at your desk. So I would say, yeah, use your information. Your body's giving you a lot of information. It's obviously telling you that you're needing more self-care, but try and think about how you can incorporate it into your day, and don't be scared to speak up for it. These are new and uncertain times for us, and I think we have learned to do things differently. Our priorities might have changed. But if you were able to, there's a lot of evidence out there to suggest that if you can prioritize self-care, then you'll be a more productive, more capable person in the workplace. So that's something to think about as well. So thanks for asking that question. So Martin on Twitter. Good morning, Helen. I've been gloomy for the last few months, feeling restless and finding it difficult to stick to a routine. The more I worry about it, the worse it gets. What should I do? Okay, so worrying, Martin, is obviously something that's not helping, and it's very hard to switch off. But I would suggest that if it's been for a few months, I would try and speak to somebody, whether that would be a friend or family or your GP, and trying to make a bit of sense over why it is you're feeling this way. Finding it difficult to stick to a routine, I guess it would be helpful to maybe prioritize what it is important to you. But more importantly, Martin, I would really encourage you to perhaps speak to somebody about your feelings. Worrying can be a bit of a sign that things are maybe not as great as they should be, but there is a lot of help out there, whether your GP is able to advise you of resources in your area, or I'm sure if you did some searching online, there are lots of therapies being offered online at the moment. I don't know how amenable your employer would be to you having a discussion with them, but there might also be some help through your workspace, some employee assistance or counselling services. So my suggestion would be that you speak up about how you're feeling with somebody that you can trust. So Claudia on Instagram, a DM. I often find speaking about trauma that happened to me helps me take ownership of it and lessen its power. However, I do not want to upset others who may be struggling. How do we find a balance between the two? Claudia, this is a great question, and thank you for raising it on here. I agree, being someone who works a lot with people experiencing trauma, I think it is important to talk about it. And I wonder about what is it that's making you think it's upsetting other people? Is that fact, or is that something you're thinking in your head? I guess you could check out with people, are you okay if we talk about this? Because you will know that some people can be triggered by other people's trauma. And I guess maybe it's just giving people the opportunity to say, no, they're not okay with this, or yes, they are. It's about finding the balance between the two. I guess that really depends on who you're talking to. And it may be that you don't upset others, but I would just check in with other people as you're going along. Is this okay? Is this upsetting you? Is this okay to talk about this? And that way you'll learn from the other people what the balance might be. But I think it's very important to talk about some of the things that you're keeping inside. And that is something that, people who experience trauma don't do. So that's great that you're working on that. So well done for that. So Harrison on Facebook Messenger. Hi, Helen. I'm so happy you're talking about this, as I've struggled with this in the workplace before. On one occasion, I had a bit of a breakdown in the office due to stress. While most were sympathetic, some people later said I was unprofessional. How do we avoid our emotions getting high but still voice that we're feeling vulnerable at work? Harrison, this is a really great question, and this is exactly why I wanted to talk about this, because it's one I hear my patients talking about. It's one I hear when I go into the workplace. It's why Charlie, who's the founder of OK Positive, started the app, because he had this exact experience in his workplace. And this is why we need to begin to change the narratives that are out there, because I think it's quite destructive, especially now when, we're living with the threat of the pandemic. There's so much stuff going on in the world that, how can we button up our, we can't just zip it off and go into work and pretend everything's fine. And my background is nursing, so I nursed for many years before I went into psychology, and I was always told, oh, don't bring your problems to work, but we spend such a huge amount of our time in the workplace. It just seems to me ridiculous that, keeps like a pressure cooker, keep it all inside until we go home. And then the effects can be that it will affect our loved ones and the people that we live with. So I would suggest, when we talked about the hermit crab, or when I talked about the hermit crab earlier, that hermit crab had to feel vulnerable in order to make things better. So I guess what I'm saying, Harrison, is there anyone at your workplace you could talk to about maybe discussing mental health in the workplace? Would there be ways of your workplace being more accommodating to make space for people to talk about it? A shameless plug for OK Positive. This is exactly what the app is designed to do. It's designed to help employers and employees talk more freely about mental health issues as they arise in the workplace. It's really interesting that, some of your colleagues were sympathetic and that some said it was unprofessional. I wonder, I would be keen to know, why would they say that? Is it unprofessional to be a human being? That's essentially what's being said. And most often stress will happen when we try and suppress our emotions. So the more that we go into work thinking, I can't cry, I can't be upset, the more we're going to feel stressed, the more we're going to, try and maybe take time off, but if we can just say, oh, today I'm not feeling great, wouldn't that change things? So I'm just reading over your question again. I think your question at the end was, how do we avoid our emotions getting high but still voice if we're feeling vulnerable at work? I would say, Harrison, that the reason our emotions get high is because we try to avoid them, we try and suppress them. So I would encourage you, if possible, and it's about becoming vulnerable, if we can just voice how we're feeling early on, it tends not to rise. An example would be for me that I can sometimes get quite anxious. I suffered anxiety going back a few years, but one thing I did to help me with that was, if I was feeling anxious in company, I would just simply say, oh, I'm feeling a bit anxious, and then the feeling would kind of come down a little bit. So really just to check in with your feelings and to try and vocalize it, and try not to avoid pushing them away, because that tends to be then what creates the bigger, more intense emotions. And encourage your workplace to get the OK Positive app, and we can speak to them about that. So thank you, Harrison, for that question. So Asa on Instagram DM, while the majority of my colleagues are vaccinated and restrictions have been lifted, I still feel quite vulnerable being around a lot of people. How do I communicate this? I don't want everyone to have to make exceptions just for me. I'm sure, Asa, that most people, or a lot of people, can resonate with this. We can see on the news every day that the numbers are going up, and it's almost like, we've lifted the restrictions and it's back to normal, but it's not. I think it's these feelings that you're having are really valid, and I think it's okay to express that. I would maybe be speaking to your line manager again, or I don't know how you would feel about having a discussion in the workplace. I guess if people don't know about it, how can they help you? I heard a really good podcast the other week. A colleague of mine who does People Soup podcast had somebody on talking about psychological first aid, and they had some really interesting ideas about teams having sort of profiles on how people like to work, what people expect, how people are feeling, so that they can take that into account when they're feeling stressed or anxious. So there's just some suggestions for you. Just checking the time here. So we seem to be coming near to the end, but I might have time for one more question before we do the poll. So Leslie on Twitter, DM, a lot of older generations either don't take mental health seriously or find it difficult to talk about. How can we break the stigma at work? Well, as I said earlier, I guess the older generation may have more of the stiff upper lip. You don't talk about mental health. Oh, really poo-poo it. It's not something serious. But we're living in a different world now. Our networks are huge. It's a faster pace. Things are different. And as well, older generations had their families round about them, so they had space to talk about things. Generally, I'm very much generalizing. I think the way to break the stigma at work is just to keep talking about it. Just lead by example, and encourage people to talk about it. I know when I've gone in to do workshops, then there's some people who sit there and think, oh, this is all just a load of nonsense. But towards the end of it, they're all opening up and talking, and the feeling that gives is quite incredible. So I would say keep up the good work and keep talking about it, and also encourage your employers to have a look at our app, because that's something that could maybe help. So again, just checking in with the time here. The poll results are in, and the question we posed was, how comfortable are you with showing vulnerability? Oh, and 60% said that you were comfortable. 20% of you said a bit, and 20% said I'm not. So that's great to hear. And hopefully after today, maybe some of you might be a bit more willing to be more vulnerable in the workplace. Maybe think about the hermit crab and think about the gains that you would get if you're willing to share some of your inner experiences with the workplace, talk about mental health. It doesn't have to be heavy conversations. It can just be, things that stress you, how you feed things back. And good luck with that. And thank you guys for filling in the poll. That's really helpful and really nice to see. So thank you all for tuning in today. If you want to get in contact with me or any of the team at OK Positive, just email info@okpositive.org, and we'd be really happy to answer your questions and give some information to you about the app and the work that we're doing and what our priorities will be. So coming up on Ask the Expert tomorrow is Andrew Bloch. He is the founder of Bloch Associates, and he is the PR expert and the official spokesperson for Lord Alan Sugar since 2001. So I wonder how he deals with vulnerability. That would be an interesting question to ask him. So tune in to learn everything you want to know about PR tomorrow. And a reminder that if you need any more advice, join the official QuickBooks Intuit SMB community group on Facebook, where accountants and business experts are on hand 24/7. So thank you so much for your questions today, and thank you for your time and for tuning in. I've really enjoyed answering your questions this morning, and have a great day. Thank you.